plant that you see is called Lobelia inflata. There are a couple ways you can tell this. One of the ways is because of these inflated seed pods. You can see these inflated seed pods here. These seed pods form at the base of the flowers after the flowers are pollinated. And you can see them starting up here. On the stem of Lobelia, you will notice these little hairs. It gets hairier and hairier as you go down the plant. I'll show you the base of the plant here. You can see all of these little bitty hairs. This is one of the identification factors of Lobelia inflata. Here you can see the inflated seed pods and what was left of the flower. If you squeeze these seed pods, they'll feel as if they are inflated, as if there's air inside of them. This plant has alternating leaves, as you can see here. They alternate all the way down the stem. The underside of Lobelia's leaves are hairy as well, whereas the top of them is not. The leaves are lance-shaped and they are toothed. You'll also notice these little white specks on the leaves. The flowers are pale blue in this species. This plant's flowers are in a tube shape. It has 5 petals. The top 2, as you can see here, lip upwards and they split. Sorry about that. The 3 lower petals hang down. Here you can see the 5 petals. The 2 upper petals that lip upwards have split. You can see they're fully split all the way down to the corolla. Hey guys, this is Josh here with Trillium Wild Edibles. I'm out here doing some deer hunting, and right here in front of my little spot, my ground blind, I found these little oyster mushrooms. So I thought I would shoot a little video on them for you guys today. You can see these little oyster mushrooms aren't that big. However, this is typical of oyster mushrooms this time of year. I don't usually notice them getting too big. Oyster mushroom is an extremely delicious mushroom to eat. It's commonly foraged in the early spring all the way to the fall. There are 2 different types of oysters. You've got summer oysters and you've got spring and fall oysters. This is one of the spring or fall oysters. A couple of ways you can tell that this is an oyster mushroom is its color. You can see how it's starting to brown towards the tip. And as this mushroom gets older, it's going to become browner and browner. Here you can see how the edge is scalloped. You can see how it hangs down. The gills of the oyster mushroom are forked and they are decurring. You can see here at the top how these are forked gills. You can also see how the gills go all the way down the stem. It's very important to keep in mind. Now the oyster mushroom is a shelf mushroom which prefers trees. Obviously, you see it growing on a dead log here. The types of trees that it prefers are generally, I usually find them on tulip poplars. As a matter of fact, I think, yeah, that's actually what this is right now. As a matter of fact, that's what this one is on right now, is a tulip poplar. But I generally find them on hardwood, softwoods, kind of like tulip poplar or maple, things like that. I don't usually find them on oaks or beeches or anything of that nature. However, you can find them on pine trees, although the way I understand it is those aren't so good to be eating. I don't know why, but I hear they make some people's stomach upset. I've never eaten them off of pine trees. I gather all of mine off of tulip poplars or the like. The shrub that you see here is called spice bush, or Lindera benzoin. It's called that because it actually does contain benzoin, which is actually a medical compound. Spice bush is a common shrub here in the eastern woodlands. You're going to find it generally in moist areas. I usually find mine on slopes, generally where there's a good amount of runoff, or next to a creek. Spice bush is a really easy plant to identify overall. It's extremely aromatic, and it, to me, kind of smells like a mix of allspice and sassafras. The leaves of spice bush are broad. They're very broad, as you can see here. There's 3 of my fingers, so that's about 3 inches in width at its widest. They're smooth on the margins. You'll notice there are no teeth on the margins of these leaves. They're elliptical in shape, or oval, whichever you prefer to call this shape. Spice bush produces these oval, oblong-shaped red berries that are very shiny and glossy. You can see the gloss on this one here. Usually these berries will cover the entire plant, but they start out of the nodes of the stems, as you can see here. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. And here you can see the oblong oval shape of these berries. And I'll compare the spice bush to I'll compare the spice bush to a couple other bushes in the area that look similar, so that way you don't get them confused. On spice bush, if you take one of the berries and you squeeze it in between your fingers really hard, these berries do have a really large seed that's really hard. Here you can see the seed, and you can also see that juice on my hand. Whenever you crush one of these berries, you'll notice the smell of allspice and sassafras mixed together. These berries are extremely aromatic, and you'll note that they're really oily and slippery. But you can actually take these berries and you can dry them, and then you can ground them up and make a substitute for allspice out of them and use them in baking for breads or cakes or things like that. Spice bush can grow to a variety of heights, and this bush that you see in front of me is about 5 feet tall. I found spice bushes that are 6 to 7 feet tall, but I generally, in the eastern woodlands, I don't see them getting much taller than 10 feet usually. Usually by that time they're starting to spread out more and cover more of the surface area instead of reaching up for the sky. But there are a couple bushes that look like spice bush, and they do have red berries on them as well. However, the berries are shaped differently, the leaves are shaped differently, and they do not have that distinct smell. Here's another common bush in the eastern woodlands that some people confuse with spice bush, generally from a distance. I think some of it is because of these red berries. However, you can see that these berries are perfectly circular. They're in a sphere. Whereas spice bush's berries are an oval shape. They're oblong. Another way to tell the difference is these leaves. Here you can see how these leaves are kind of oval shaped, or teardrop shaped. They have a very sharp, narrow point at the end. You can also see the leaves on this bush are opposite, whereas on spice bush, you can see that the leaves alternate. And this is a different spice bush plant than the one we were looking at in the woods. However, that helps to kind of give you guys a better idea of what they actually look like. And I have no clue what this bush is. I just know that it looks similar to spice bush, and I've seen people confuse this with spice bush. And you don't want to put anything in your mouth if you don't know what it is. We'll go over to another shrub here. And here you can see again the difference in these leaves. These leaves are very long and narrow, lance-shaped almost. These are smooth and they do have a very fine point. But if we take this leaf, that leaf and come over to a spice bush and set that leaf on top, we can see the different shapes of these leaves. And really my preferred method to determine whether I'm looking at a spice bush, besides all the things I just showed you, is I just like to pluck a leaf off, rub it between my fingers, and then smell it. Whenever I smell that aromatic allspice and sassafras smell, I know I've got spice bush. Right here in front of us, these blue flowers you see are great blue lobelia. There are a couple of ways you can tell this. The first and foremost is because of the very distinct flowers that lobelia is known for having. Here you'll notice 5 petals, the 3 that hang down, and then the upper 2 that are lipped. Those are split. The flowers are in a tube or trumpet-like shape, as you can see here. And of course, that's one of the main identification factors of a lobelia, is those distinct flowers. Now the leaves also alternate on this plant. Just like in lobelia inflata, the leaves are alternate. They do not grow opposite. The leaves of great blue lobelia are long and they are elliptical in shape. And they have very, very fine serrations on them. You can see these fine serrations here. The underside of these leaves are slightly hairy. They're not as hairy as lobelia inflata, but they are hairy on the underside. The top of these leaves have little fuzz as well. You'll notice the stem has little hairs running all up and down it. You'll also notice these little hairs all along the stem and along the green flower bracts on lobelia. The stem of great blue lobelia is ribbed. This plant stands a couple feet tall. This plant actually gets bigger than inflata, and this plant does not have the inflated seed pods that lobelia inflata has. Now great blue lobelia prefers a lot of the same type of environments that boneset does. As you'll notice, there's some boneset right there. And this is extremely common for me to find these two plants together in the same environment. And again, same environment as boneset, a huge clearing that stays really moist in between 2 tree lines. What you're looking at right now is called boneset. This is a very medicinal plant. This plant is extremely good for colds and flus. It's also good for bone bumps, like if you get a bruise or on your bone, or maybe you've got like arthritis or something. This plant is really good for that. There are a couple different ways you can identify boneset. The easiest, obviously, is these white flowers. You can see there is a lot of flowers here on this one plant, and this is all one plant. But if you look closely at these flowers, you'll notice all these little stamens, all these little spikes. The stem of boneset is extremely hairy. I'm sure you can notice that here, all those little bitty hairs. The leaves of boneset go around the stem. The stem perforates the leaves. Here you can see a fold in the leaf on both sides, right where the stem meets. And here is an underside view of the leaf and stem section of boneset. Here's a different angle of the stem perforating the leaves. Whenever you feel these leaves, you'll notice that they feel kind of leathery. They feel almost kind of like buckskin, in my opinion, on the top. The underside feels kind of fuzzy. And here you'll notice the fuzz, or the little hairs, on the underside of the leaves of boneset. You'll see the vein, the main vein, is very prominent on the backside of the leaf. Whereas on the top, it's just a crease. The leaves are very long, they are lance-shaped, and they are toothed. Now, the area I'm in, it stays really moist, so you're going to find boneset in clearings that are moist. You're not going to find it in dry, high fields where you're going to find like echinacea or things like that. It's a really easy plant to identify. You can find it pretty much anywhere. The places it really likes to grow, though, these are the kind of areas where boneset likes to grow. This is just a huge clearing in between two tree lines. The parts that you want to use on boneset are the flowers and the leaves. Those are the most medicinal parts, and you want to use those dried. The little mushrooms that you see in front of you are gem-studded puffballs. The gem-studded puffball is a common mushroom in the eastern woodlands, and like other puffballs, it prefers bare soil, kind of like the mound of dirt that you see here. They usually grow solitary or in groups of 2 to 3, and very rarely do I find a lot of them at once. However, I generally find other puffballs nearby, like pear-shaped puffballs. There are a couple of ways that you can tell this is a gem-studded puffball. The small puffball is kind of shaped like a top and is white in color. Another way you can tell is because of all those little studs that you see on top. Its round shape, followed by its texture, it has a texture kind of like a common puffball. Here is a close-up of the studs on the top of the mushroom. Just like with any other puffball, it will get softer as it ages and deteriorates, and feels sort of like an empty sack. You can generally tell when a puffball is too old to harvest because if you squeeze them, you will usually see spores coming out. However, the two in front of us look to be very good. Whenever I go to squeeze this one, I can tell that it's very firm by feel. Also, whenever I go to squeeze the other one, it too is firm as well. So these two are probably going to be okay to harvest. But since there's only two, and here is my index finger, you can see how small these really are. So I'm not going to take these. Another way you can tell if they are too old to harvest is to cut them in half. When you do, they should be white on the inside. You shouldn't see any brown or green, and also check for signs of a stem developing inside. Doing this will help you to determine them from any young toxic lookalikes, for example, Entoloma or Amanita species. Also, after cutting, the smell of mushrooms will become very strong. Here's an example of what puffballs will generally look like whenever they start to decay and deteriorate. Though these are pear-shaped puffballs, this still gives you a kind of good example of what I mean by an empty sack. The little hole that you see in the top here is where the spores will come out whenever you give the mushroom a squeeze. And you can see that whenever I squeeze this one, all these little spores will come out, kind of like a little green smog cloud. Also, you may note that after squeezing them, you'll see these little indentations where your fingers were, just like you can see here. However, you can see that there was quite a bit of them here. Unfortunately though, they're not worth harvesting. Here's a close-up of a little cluster of pear-shaped puffballs that have all developed holes in the tops. This is just so you guys can get an idea of what to avoid, and that whenever you see this on your puffballs, they're going to be way too old to harvest. Hey guys, this is Josh here with Trillium Wild Edibles. I want to bring you guys an identification video on bee balm. This is one of the varieties of bee balm that we have here in the state. Some of the varieties are red or purple, like an actual purple. Some of them are pink, and some of them are white, and then some of them are variations of either one of those colors. This is in the mint family. These flowers are very distinct. The lower petal is kind of like a lip. You can see the top petal is a bunch of spikes. The flower heads, each individual flower comes out of this huge cluster They have these spiked tubules sticking up out of them. Like any other mint, the stem is square, and it smells like mint. The leaves are lance-shaped and toothed. And these two leaflets here at the back of the stem. The leaves are opposite, meaning that they are on opposite sides of the stem, as you see here. When you rub the leaves and then smell them, you'll smell mint. And when you smell the flower, you will smell mint as well. This plant is edible as well as medicinal. Very, very, very good for headaches and relieving pains, sore muscles, etc. Like any of the other mints, it makes a very delicious tea. This is a plant that I don't see too many videos on, so I thought I would shoot one for you guys. Really easy plant to identify. I'm sure that you can spot them here. You can see they're everywhere. This plant will grow in clearings or fields like you see here, or it could grow on the edge of woodlots like you see over there. This plant starts blooming in June, and it, I believe, flowers all the way until August. It's called bee balm because the bees absolutely love it, and for good reason. You can see these waxy crystals here. These are one thing that makes the plant waterproof. As you can see, they rub off rather easy. This is one of the major identification factors of lamb's quarters. Now, this is a common feature in a lot of plants in the Chenopodium family, which is the family, I should say, that lamb's quarters is in. You're going to find these waxy crystals on a lot of the Chenopodiums. You know, like Mexican tea, New Jersey tea, I think, is one of them. Toad flax. There are several varieties of them, and most of them you don't want to eat the leaves raw. Not because they'll kill you, they just will upset your stomach a little bit. They're hard to digest, and it's because of these crystals here, these waxy, like, now wild crystals. Spinach will grow, as you can see, very, very tall. It does have a toxic look-alike, and one of those is the nightshade. But not to worry, as the nightshade does not have these distinct waxy crystals. Nightshade also does not grow this tall. So that's another key identification factor. These kind of spear or lance-shaped leaves that are toothed, as you can see. There are variations throughout a lot of the leaves. There are several variations of leaves here, as you can see. You know, like for example, this one has these lobes here on this side. On the left side of it, or the right side as you're looking at it into the camera, you see two lobes over there, and then over here on this one's rather uniform in shape until you get back here. So the leaves, you can't really say there's a definitive shape to the leaves, but there is. It's a definitively changing shape, in my opinion. Now this plant does flower, but It is not time for the flowers yet. Whenever it does flower, they will come out of here. This plant has a very thick stem. The stem has the same crystals on it. If you look down there and watch after I grab my thumb, it's no longer white. And you can see the stuff there. You can see those waxy crystals on my thumb. The entire plant is covered in these crystals. A very key identification factor. Now, as you can see here, the stem is ribbed. It may look square, but that's just because it's ribbed. The stem here is a hexagon because of these ribs. And you can see the ribs there. Notice something else about wild spinach is each node has a purple mark in it. And you'll see this, like I said, on each node. Go to another plant over here so you can see that it too has purple tinges in the nodes. Another identification factor. We'll go to the other side. And again, here you can see this purple in the node. Sorry about that. As you can see, there is plenty of ways to separate this plant from a nightshade, just on the things that I've shown you, like the waxy crystals, it being waterproof, these crystals rubbing off, and it not being hairy anywhere. There is no hair on this plant. It may look hairy from a distance, but that is those waxy crystals. Its stem, main stem, will be ribbed once it gets to this size. You can see these ribs there. You're going to see red tinges in all of the nodes. Here is a very tiny lamb's quarters or wild spinach plant just coming in. You can see there are several here. I want to show you what they look like small and big. Here is a really tiny one that has just been massacred. But as you can see, at this point, those red tinges in the nodes are non-existent. So make sure you pay attention to these little crystals. The heart-shaped leaf that you see in front of you is wild ginger. There are a couple ways you can tell this, and one of the biggest, obviously, is this leaf. The leaf has a very distinct heart shape with this cleft at the back towards the petiole of the stem. This is a really common springtime wild edible, and most people come across this plant generally in the early spring while they're foraging for morels. In the early spring, you'll notice this plant's flower on the underside of the leaf. It's late fall now, so there is no flower. And you can see this other stem here. This other stem had a leaf on it. And in the early spring, there will be a flower underneath these leaves. It's a maroon flower, and it's very small. It's about a little larger than a pea. The
top of the leaves of wild ginger have small fuzz on them, as I'm sure you can see here. Whenever you rub the leaves, you'll notice they feel kind of bristly on the top. The underside of wild ginger's leaves, they might feel a little mealy, as if they've got like cornmeal or something on them. The stem of wild ginger is very delicate, and it has little hairs and bristles running up and down it. Now this one's got sand and dirt all over it. Usually this plant grows in large colonies, and generally wherever you find one, you'll find another. You can see over there is another. You can see we've got one there. And there's another one there. Usually whenever you find wild ginger, you will find it carpeting an entire area of forestry. However, in this case, there only seems to be a few here. The rootstock of wild ginger is what most people use, and it's very shallowly buried. As a matter of fact, this one's sticking out of the ground right now. And there you can see that rootstock. If I just move the dirt aside here, you can see it. And this is the root of wild ginger. And if you were wanting to use wild ginger as a ginger substitute, or for a candy or baking or anything of that sort, this is the part you would use. Here you can see this little horn-shaped sprout at the end. And this little horn-shaped sprout is going to go on and continue the next generation of this plant. These plants propagate by their spreading rhizomes, or these spreading rootstocks. And here you can see this horn-shaped sprout, which will carry on the next generation of wild ginger. So I'm just going to cover this back up, seeing as how it was mostly uncovered already. But I'm going to cover that back up with dirt and some leaves, and I'm going to go on about my way. Here you can see these little pods. They look sort of like tomatillos. This is the ground cherry. I don't know if this is the smooth or the clammy, but these are ground cherries, and there are quite a bit of them right here. This is a surprising find. Usually whenever you find these plants, you don't find very many. But right through there seems to be a good bit right there. I'm not going to shoot an identification video on this because it'd be really hard to shoot a proper identification video. However, if we look on the ground, you can see a lot of these fruits, these papery sheaths, have fallen off. And that's the sign you want to be looking for. You want them to be off of the plant, because then you know that they're pretty much ripened up. Here you can see the inside of them. It's like a little miniature tomatillo. Now I'm not going to be picking any of these because, like I said, this plant's rather rare anymore. But here you can see the inside. See, it's a lot like a little miniature tomatillo. And whenever you smell it, it'll smell like a mix of a cherry and a tomatillo, at least in my opinion. I want to spread these seeds around a bit here. But I thought this was really cool to find so many of them. I usually don't find this many all in one area, but there is a lot right here. And wherever you find ground cherries, you're probably going to be finding nightshade as well. However, they look very different, even at this time of year. Here you can see this nightshade has thorns on it. Ground cherry does not have thorns. So I thought I would share that with you guys today. I'm actually going to probably take a couple of these home so I can try to grow them at my house. Try to hopefully regenerate this plant. Hey guys, this is Josh with Trillium Wild Edibles. want to shoot this video about poisonous lookalikes. Here we have flowering iris. Get a close-up flower here. This is a lookalike, a toxic lookalike to the cattail. This is the time of year when the cattail flower spikes are going to be coming up. Obviously you can tell the difference this time of year because of these purple flowers. But they prefer the same type of environments that cattails do. And here's some good proof of that over here. It can be real easy to get these confused in the early spring when most people go for the cattail shoots generally. And they'll go for this section of the cattail. But early in the spring you can't tell the difference generally between the cattail and the iris. But if we investigate closely here, you can see how the cattail layers, almost kind of like a leek. Whereas over here with the iris, hopefully you can see how from a side view it grows flat and not round. It fans, as you can see here, it fans out. All these leaves, these blades, radiate outwards from a single point. And that single point is flattened. It's not round like the cattail. So that's the best way to tell whenever you're out in early spring and you're trying to go for cattail shoots or young cattail stalks, either or. That's how you can tell the difference without waiting for these flower spikes. But as you can see, it's rather round here. And you can see how the majority of this stalk or this shoot all the way up, it's rather round and it maintains that roundness. And up here it looks as if these are kind of fanning out, and they are a little bit, but you can see here how they go in and they layer in a tube in comparison to the iris, which is flattened. If I put these together, it makes a tube or a circular tubular shape.